First and foremost, thanks for everyone that showed up. I think this is our actual first real talk for 2021. Thus far, we've mostly been doing workshops and hackathons and things. So this is the first talk. And I actually don't think we have had you before, Mike. Correct me if I'm wrong. No, which is actually such a shame. I still want you to do a talk on web components as well. I generally have people that are kind of like my go-to person for things. Like Justin's kind of like my go-to web typography guy, and you've been my go-to web components guy now for a very long time. So I would really love for you to do a talk on web components. But yeah, so yeah, you're very much involved in a lot of Google products and things, and this Web Vitals. It's also something that I'm very interested in. To be honest, I don't actually know that much about it. I saw it start popping up in my kind of Create React app installs. I just left it there. I didn't take it out. But yeah, so I'm super curious about this topic. But yeah, Mike is someone who definitely has a lot of experience, is pretty skilled within the dev community, someone who's opinion I very much trust, who I kind of consider as someone who has a lot of insight into kind of the dev community at large and kind of the movement of things. He's also very involved within the actual community aspect itself. I assume you're still very involved with kind of the Johannesburg JavaScript community. Yeah.
Definitely. And our meetups are, shameless plug, our meetups are every third Thursday of the month. They're completely online and streamed at the moment. So if any of the folks here want to see a slightly different perspective on the same kind of content, please feel free to join there.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. I'm definitely going to join in. Yeah, and that's about it. I'd rather let you continue, give a bit of a, you're welcome to give shout outs and plugs and things, because you tend to be very, as I mentioned, very involved in the community. So the things that you are involved with is probably the type of things that the people who are attending tonight would be interested in as well. But yeah, I'll give it over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my, can I share my screen, please?
I just clicked the button.
Okay, cool. Otherwise it's going to be a long period of me talking. That's not the right screen. That's the wrong screen.
I also just quickly want to add as well. So I saw someone ask in the text chat, a link to the meetup. I'll just share it there. But as I think what we generally do, as Mike's talking, if you have any questions, just post it in the text chat, and then he can maybe stop whenever there's a suitable time, and maybe we can look at some of the questions, and I'll maybe relay them to him. And yeah, so please use the text chat for any questions as he's talking. But
yeah, we've got plenty of time, so if there are any questions, please feel free to ask them, even if it interrupts things. I'm sure that's fine.
Cool.
Super casual.
Over to you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so as you may have gathered by now, I am Mike. Hi. Thank you for having me. I am a Web Performance and Capabilities GDE, which means that I speak to some really, really cool, smart folks at Google who work on the performance side of things and then the capabilities, so installability and Project Fugu stuff. But that's not what I'm here to talk about today. I'm here to talk about the performance bits. Now, there is some considerable overlap between that and my day job at the present. I am a tech lead at Equal Experts, where I lead a performance team at one of our big clients. I live in Johannesburg. I'm sorry. Yes, I like it here. I'm one of those Philistines. And I'm here to talk to you today about the Web Vitals. Now, I like starting these things often by asking the big questions, the big open-ended questions, like why? Why are we here? Why do I do this to myself? Why should I even care about this topic that you're talking about? And well, let's dig through that a little bit, because the why starts a little bit with performance. So as many of us know, performance is not something that gets prioritized very early on in the cycle. It only starts being a focus when things are wrong, right? So very defensively when things break, or you know, people start complaining, and that's not great. And hopefully, in some senses, the Web Vitals are a change to try and get people to focus on proactive performance. But by and large, it's that whole performance narrative that I'm going to be talking about. And I think that there are some compelling reasons as to why we can and should convince people to care about performance. So, I mean, maybe you don't like being insanely bombarded by ads on the internet and the invasion in terms of the user experience. Or maybe it's content moving the page, and pages not being stable either on page load or while you're using the page, and you know, accidentally misclicking on something and interacting and going somewhere completely unintended. Maybe it's when pages don't respond at all and you end up wondering, like, what's actually happening? Why is it not interactive? And rage clicking. And these are all things that are happening to your users on your websites right now. And then maybe it's the fact that we live in Africa, right? And we have some of the worst and most expensive mobile data, and we have a proliferation of medium to low end phones that are not very highly powered. So the combination of those things means that maybe we have a vested interest in performance and in the performance of our users. And then, you know, from a more cynical perspective, if you look more directly at businesses, there are some compelling reasons as to why businesses should care about performance. Maybe it's a question of competitive advantage, where if you're a little bit faster than your competition, you get seen completely differently in the marketplace. A very important facet from any kind of e-commerce perspective. Or maybe it's something that you care about getting content out, or sharing content, or growing organically. And in that sense, like, speed has long been a key indicator in search engine optimization and page ranking. Or maybe you care about growth in terms of our local demographic, in terms of reaching into, you know, a market segment that has traditionally been underrepresented in the building for billions narrative. Maybe these are things that you care about. And topically, I have to mention it, that this is something that is under hot review at the moment, because if you were not aware, the Google Search Console or Google Search Experience is changing how they rank page experience starting in May 2021. And in May 2021, they're going to be looking at the core Web Vitals on mobile particularly, to signal to users, and that could most likely take a form of badging or some kind of textual notification saying that this page is usually fast or usually slow. You don't really want to be the page that you've put all that effort in ranking on Google search, and then it says, well, this page is usually slow or usually has a lot of layout shifts. So I'm going to stop at this point in time and say that if this is the category that you fall into and you care about this kind of stuff at all, and you're worried about the May 2021 deadline, then focus on mobile. We should really start dogfooding mobile first, not just from a design perspective, but also from a performance perspective. Okay, so moving on to a broad open-ended question. So what is this thing that I'm talking about? So there are three core metrics that are a part of the Web Vitals at the moment. They're probably going to expand it, and I'll get onto that in a little bit, but there are three to care about right now as it stands. So the first one is largest contentful paint. And largest contentful paint is basically the amount of time it takes for the largest image or block text to render in the page. And this is seen as sort of a user-facing measurement for how fast the page loads. And they've tried they being Google, have tried several different metrics in the past, like words. Words are failing me right now. Oh my word.
Time to first byte.
No, not time to first byte necessarily. Speed index, which is basically like progression of frames. And they've tried things like first meaningful paint, which you may be familiar with, that they tried in Lighthouse a few years back. But like the largest single item that gets painted on the page is a really easy thing for them to calculate. And in this case, like easy means a simple algorithm, and a simple algorithm hopefully means more stable results. Interestingly, largest contentful paint is the conceptually simplest of these metrics, but it's also the one that in the wild is showing really, really poor results. So don't assume just because you understand when your contentful painted item is on the page or what it constitutes, that it's going to necessarily be fast. Another thing to remember is that if you've got hyperlinks throughout your page, the thing that people might be linking to, or sorry, the anchor tags throughout your page, the thing that people might be linking to may not necessarily be the header image of the page. It might be halfway through that people have deep linked into. The next item to talk about is first input delay. Now, first input delay is basically how long it takes for the JavaScript main thread and the page to be able to respond to user input. And this is sort of a measurement of user-facing interactivity and responsiveness, and like that sense of lag or frozenness of the page. The actual measurement for this can be pretty complicated and is very hard to measure in synthetic or simulate in synthetic testing. But it is a really, really important metric, specifically in terms of JavaScript heavy pages, which is what a lot of us end up producing. And then the last one, which is the newest conceptual metric, is the idea of cumulative layout shifts. And that's the visual stability of the page, both during and after page load, which is an important thing. Because during page load, it will show the sort of like structural stability of the page. And then after page load, as the user moves through the page without interacting it, whether things jank around or stutter or deliberately move. It guards against some very interesting cynical patterns. So hijacking clicks particularly, some advertising patterns, and some relaying out patterns. So it's very interesting from that perspective. Now, there are, as I said, there are a whole bunch of future metrics that they're considering. This is a really, really small set, and they froze the set up until nowish because they want to make sure that it's very conceptually simple to seize these three metrics. But they are planning to include a whole bunch over time. TTFB was mentioned. That's probably going to be one of them, as well as first contentful paint is probably going to be one of them. So first contentful paint, topical, let's talk about that. Largest contentful paint can penalize some sites that load really, really quickly, that are instant loading, that do lots of really smart pre-caching, but lazy load their images. And that seems counterintuitive, right? Because the largest thing might be an image, but the layout of the page might be completely stable, as well as all of the static readable content there. You're just waiting for the hero image to load. So they're going to introduce first contentful paint to try and, not double penalize sites that are actually really, really fast. Cumulative layout shift will be weighted higher than it is at the moment. And this is in reference to Lighthouse particularly. They're happy with how the layout shift metric is progressing and expect lots more in and around that. But there are still some problems. So cumulative layout shift really hurts longer lived sites. So some people are building apps, like with Create React App, possibly, that have lots of page transitions and lots of things that get seen as layout shifts. And this is a bit of a problem. So when the user leaves the page, you're going to get a single massive penalty at present. And that's something that's actively under consideration as to how we can do that and still keep the metric relevant. And then additional to that is the FID thresholds. At the moment, they're really, really small, and the team is trying to figure out like what is a meaningful lag. Like is 100 milliseconds too harsh, or is it too lenient? Is it right, and what is right by users? And this, I think, is requiring of a lot of user testing. SPAs, as I mentioned, suffer a lot from layout shift, but it's not just layout shift, right? Because if you're shipping down a single page application, it's going to have a lot of JavaScript. So the first input delay is also going to be penalized, as well as potentially largest contentful paint, because that content item is not coming down via HTML potentially. And there's other stuff that they're looking at introducing, like smooth scrolling, which will be very, very interesting, because I don't think it's a thing that many developers have thought about, right? How does one create smooth scrolling in terms of layout, and particularly like dynamically generated layout? So yeah, the vitals will be surfaced, as I said, either via the search come 1 May, or not 1 May, sometime in May. But additionally, we don't know what the badging will look like, and we don't know what those indicators will look like. That will probably come over time, and we'll find out more. Now, I'm sure you would have heard about Lighthouse before, or you would have played around with Lighthouse. And there is this interesting question of, well, there are so many tools. There's Lighthouse, there's the Chrome UX report, there's PageSpeed Insights, which is a little bit older. And now there's this Core Web Vitals, and what is the overlap between them? So let's just focus on the first part, which is Lighthouse and the Core Web Vitals. And to explain the relationship between the two of them, we need to talk about RUM. No, not that kind of RUM, real user metrics, okay? And when we talk about real user metrics, we need to take a look at what actual user telemetry looks like and the difference between lab versus field data. Now, if you consider users in the wild, the same page will load quickly for some users and really slowly for other users, depending on hardware, depending on network conditions, and hell, depending on a million other salient factors. So you end up getting this broad spread of data that represents your field data, things that you measure from actual people actually using your websites. Now, typically we talk about looking at this data in terms of percentiles, right? So if you look at the 50th percentile, that means that 50% of users will have this experience or better. The 95th percentile means 95% of users will have this experience or better. Now, it might seem appealing to look at the 95th percentile, but because data, statistical data and real data often has a very long tail, you'll find that your 95th percentile will fluctuate quite a lot, depending on a lot of these uncontrolled factors. And the target point that Google recommends aiming for is the 75th percentile. And that's what they're going to be using to measure folks against. Now, conversely to this, Lighthouse doesn't produce a spectrum of data, it produces one result. Even if you're running multiple Lighthouse runs in a CI environment or using a tool, you're running it in a controlled environment under controlled network conditions rather than via real users in the wild. And even though you might get 3 or 4 or 5 data points, it basically amounts to a single number, right? Now, importantly, that single number sits at the high end of your results, right? It's intended to approximate the 75th percentile. So if you run a Lighthouse test, it's trying to simulate and fake some of the worst results that your users will experience in the wild. And deliberately, the idea is that your Lighthouse results are intended to at least closely track your 75th percentile real user data or field data. And it's important to note, I suppose, that they will never be exactly the same because they're coming from 2 completely separate worlds. Now, Lighthouse is that. Lighthouse is the thing that lets you iterate really, really quickly on your local environment. You want to find layout issues on page load, for example's sake. or you want to try and figure out what your why your JavaScript is delaying your first input delay, or whatever the case may be. And the thing about Lighthouse is it gives you like high-line billboard scores, and then it gives you really detailed, actionable audit advice, things that you can follow and very clearly implement. Okay. So if we take a look at specific metrics, there are some things to keep in mind. So if you look at the cumulative layout shift, right? How much your layout moves around during the life cycle of the page. Lighthouse is only going to measure that layout shift above the fold during page load. So if you've got like an infinitely loading, infinitely scrolling website, those penalties are what is going to reflect in your real user data, but Lighthouse is never going to show you that. So if you just focus on the Lighthouse tests, it's going to cause you to micro-optimize above the fold, and it's never going to reflect your real data. So it might look fine in Lighthouse, but it might actually be a problem in production. So that's just something to keep aware of, right? First contentful paint, that's pretty straightforward. First contentful paint, and largest contentful paint, not first contentful paint, is something that isn't above the fold metric. It's the single largest item. So those two should match and have parallels directly. Now, first input delay is field data. It represents when the person can click on the page. So there's no way to simulate that in a lab environment. So what Google has done in terms of Lighthouse is they've created two metrics that if you've looked at a Lighthouse report, you might be familiar with. Now that's total blocking time and time to interactive, TBT and TTI. So total blocking time measures the amount of time that your main thread is busy running JavaScript tasks, long-running JavaScript tasks, in which it can accept no additional instructions. And time to interactive measures the amount of time it takes for your CPU to have a period of 5 seconds of silence or quietness in the profile. So when it stopped being busy loading and executing JavaScript on page load. Now, those two are considered to be proxy metrics for first input delay, meaning that if your TBT and TTI are acceptable within Lighthouse and reflect positively, you should have a very good first input delay. That should is really, really important because in theory and practice are the same, and in practice they are not. Okay, but in terms of Lighthouse, these metrics, those four, CLS, LCP, TBT, and TTI, make up the vast majority of the Lighthouse score. So from that perspective, it is a useful thing to iterate on. But there is this adage or this idiom, which is test in the lab, test individual changes, and then validate it with field data. You can't just have the one side of that equation. You can't just focus on Lighthouse. You should also look at Core Web Vitals stuff to see what people are actually recording. And on that point, let's move across to tooling. So some of the options available to you to be able to iterate and improve on your Web Vitals data. So firstly, and an easy one, is Chrome DevTools. Now this you may have seen before. It's the performance panel inside DevTools. And one day when I'm big, I will know exactly how all of this works. It's really, really intimidating and really dense piece of UI that's very difficult to understand. But I'm going to highlight a couple things. And there's a couple useful things that they've added. So for example's sake, you can see that there are little boxes by timings where it tells you the key events. So in this case, I've highlighted LCP, which is your large contentful paint. And then at the bottom, if you click on it, it says, well, this is the node. This is the thing that I found as your largest contentful paint item on this page. Then you can see that there are the reddish orangey boxes under experience, where it shows the periods within the profiled trace that resulted in layout shifts. And then below that, you can see the areas marked in red are long-running tasks that you can identify. You want those to be smaller and more broken up, so that there's more opportunity for that first input delay event to land and be queued as a JavaScript task. Now, Chrome UX reports, not everybody's necessarily played around with, but this is the golden source of data that everybody is going to be, well, that Google's going to be using to measure everybody against. And this is people who have installed Chrome and opted into reporting anonymous usage information to Google, that all of that data for origins, the top 8 million origins in the world, reports to this one single gigantic data source that they then process, and once every 28 days, they release a data set of. So roughly once a month, you can go and take a look at your origin level summaries for all of that data in quite a lot of granularity. Now, if you are so inclined and you understand how to query BigQuery, you can go take a look at the raw data and figure out stuff yourself and take a look at your origins data, which is great. I am not that person, so I rely on the second one, which is the dashboard, which I'll show, I think, a screenshot of in a moment. And then finally, if you want more granular information, you can use the RESTful API to query and get like URL level crux data to give you web vitals, which is really useful. The dashboard, however, was a relatively recent discovery of mine. It's not new, it's been around for a bit, but it is continuously updated and it's very, very useful. You only get origin level data, but you can basically just follow the prompts, authorize the Crux dashboard under Google Data Studio, and then for whatever origin you enter, it'll give you a very nice breakdown of all of the web vitals, as well as additional stuff like time to first byte, first paint, DOM content loaded device distribution, from data that they've actually measured out in the wild and aggregated for you. And it gives you this, this bar-like split of how many users experience a good result versus how many users experience a bad result. And it's very useful to visualize it like that, because trying to distill this stuff to a single number causes you to forget there's a whole bunch of people that don't have a problem. So I reckon that it's a useful thing to take a look at. And importantly, this aggregated data from Crux is free to use ostensibly, or at least they say it's free and they haven't billed me yet, so I'm sure it's free. I hope. Then back to Chrome and Chrome DevTools itself. There's a really useful performance HUD that's currently on Canary, and it should be shipping down soon, that you can just enable via DevTools, and as you navigate around on your site and on your on the web, you can see what the core web vitals are. But if you're impatient like me, there's a really useful Chrome extension that they've written that uses the exact same code to measure that for different websites. So if you are interested in this stuff, I think you should go install it and just check it out, and it gives you a good understanding of what these things mean. So how? I missed a slide, sorry, I double tapped. So another open-ended question, if we take a look at how do we fix this stuff? How do we go about iterating and fixing these core web vitals? And let's break them apart. Let's take a look at one at a time. So starting with the first one, if we just take a look at how to optimize for largest contentful paint. So basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to get the user to see the page content, the key page content, as early as possible. Now, how that is prevented is by blocking the rendering path. So anything that's synchronous that's going to block the parsing of the HTML document is going to block your LCP time. So the easy ones are to try and defer JavaScript. I favor defer over async. You can async, and there are definite use cases for it, but defer guarantees load order. So if you defer everything, it basically is the exact same as rendering your JavaScript synchronously. And guaranteeing load order is really, really useful. Sorry, point of correction, execution order. So it'll load the fastest one first, and it'll only execute in sequence. Whereas what async will do is it'll load the fastest one first, and whichever one comes back first, it'll execute. So it could happen out of order. Anyway, And then also crucially, because often these things are images or they are some other type of content, and speeding up content download is a crucial way. And you can either pre-connect to the origins that you're going to source that content from, or you can even preload critical content like images. So preload the image in the head so that the browser starts getting everything ready. By the time it reaches that point in the render cycle, it just smashes the image onto the page. We've seen really good results with that. And then the other thing to consider is server-side rendering, or even better, pre-rendering for those of you that are Jamstack people. If you just send HTML down and no JavaScript, a lot of these problems go away. I would caution people to be careful with isomorphic or universal JavaScript, so things that promise server-side rendering and then rehydration on the client, because it's blending a lot of concerns, and you're by definition going to be shipping code that is bloated and not necessarily essential for rehydration, at least in my experience. Moving on to cumulative layout shift. Now this one's really, really hard. There are some easy wins, relatively easy wins in terms of page load. So the stuff that's responsible for the structural layout of your page, so the heights and where things sit on the page, I think if you can, inlining those styles, whichever grid layout you're using or whatever, broad elements they are. And then if you are going to be using images, consider setting those images explicitly, or at least specifying the aspect ratio so that it measures some kind of stability with the browser frame itself. And that will cause less layout shift on page load. Font display optional is a really, really easy win instead of swap, because it gives a timeout for your fonts to download and render on the page. And if they don't make that window, it'll bail out and it won't render those fonts. And deferring or deleting unused styles. Deferring styles is really, really hard because we don't have any good primitives for deferring styles. But there are some, and I'm sure some people have used the print media hack to be able to lazy load CSS. But quite honestly, if you just delete the styles that you don't need on page load, you can have a far better result. Now, first input delay is difficult because anything that touches the JavaScript main thread is the fulcrum of front-end performance. JavaScript is the thing that influences your page performance the most. And there are two broad strokes that you can fall within. So you want to basically minimize the amount of time that you block the main thread. And then you also want to minimize how much work you cause the main thread to do in the first place. And how you can achieve this is by trying to reduce the number of inefficient or super long running tasks. So break them up into smaller things, look for CPU idle time to do some non-essential work. Breaking them up into smaller chunks means that there's more time, more opportunity for a user input to actually impact on the page. And then obviously, if you defer them, if you don't need to do the work now, don't spend CPU cycles on it now, rather do it on demand. So when the user does something, then go and download the script that you need and execute it. And it's not that bad. But I think that last part is limiting the unnecessary JavaScript code. I don't think people really look at the bundles that we're shipping. I don't think you look at the dependencies, or I don't think we as a whole look at the dependencies that we're shipping. And I don't think many people are shipping modern JavaScript code. Often we just fall into the defaults and ship ES5, which is incredibly wasteful because most of our browsers don't need ES5. They can run JavaScript modules directly. They can run var, let, and const, have dynamic imports and all sorts of fancy stuff that we don't need to be polyfilling out. And like the dependencies, a lot of people are still loading Lodash or Moment or large dependencies that are potentially not necessary. So I would recommend that if you care about optimizing first input delay, the first thing to take a look at is running a code coverage report in Chrome and just seeing how much of that code you're actually using on page load. And if it's not looking great, then consider figuring out what that is and cutting it out. Okay, so I've spoken quite a lot and there haven't been any questions really. So I'm really hoping that there are questions.
Sure, I'm typing up an essay here of like questions, so don't worry about possible questions. Like I can probably keep you going all night, but I obviously want to open up the floor for kind of other attendees. So you're welcome to unmute yourself, or maybe just pop a question in the text chat if you have a question.
Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Hey, cool, man. I'm good, and you?
Good, thanks. Yeah, quick question. You mentioned that we need to be careful of using universal rendering or like Next.js and friends. Could you elaborate more on why?
So Next.js is pretty good. So if you're going to use any of them, Next.js leads you down the right track. But often what ends up happening is when you're writing code for the server side and the client side, you end up like in React using hooks on the server side, which can never happen because there's no real lifecycle event for them to re-render. It only passes through the render cycle once, right? Or there's code, markdown rendering, HTML rendering code that you ship down to the wire that's completely unnecessary because you only ever render that part of the page once, like your header section, for example's sake, and you only really care about some click events. So I've found in the past that that sort of simplistic approach to combining back-end and front-end responsibilities results in a far larger bundle and shipping far more code than you actually need. And if you think about what user interactivity you need on the front end, like if we're honest, most often we just need a click event that's going to change some CSS styles or change some text. We don't need to re-render the whole DOM tree.
Okay, just a sequel to that question. So I know React are like trying to, well, I think it's in an RFC for server-side components.
Yeah.
How do you think that's going to affect everything you've just spoke about?
So the React server components is really, really interesting. There's some stuff that I don't necessarily agree with. I don't fully agree with the proprietary JavaScript format. I think the proprietary JSON structures behind React server components. I think that, I don't know, man, we used to do similar things with jQuery back in the day where we would render HTML and then use jQuery to fetch some more HTML and then smash it in the page. So it's not a new concept. I just think that they can hopefully bring some well-lit path developer ergonomics around a really good idea. I just hope that the end result ends up being a little bit better than React Suspense, which ended up being a little bit disappointing.
True. Thanks, man.
I've spotted a really good question in the chat by Vicky. That says, I've noticed a trend in our dev team opting for AMP-only sites for optimization. Cool. So Google's been really, really clear recently that, so historically, AMP was a drive to get people to build faster, mobile-friendly, federated websites. And the cherry or the carrot that they hung out in front of everyone was the search carousel. So the thing at the top of carousel search, where like you had to have an AMP page to get into the carousel, and it was punitive and people hated it. And they've been very clear recently that they're not going to do that anymore. And that sites that meet the core web vitals will make it into the search carousel, not AMP-only sites. Does that mean you should abandon AMP? No, that's not what I'm saying. It doesn't mean that if you're doing AMP stuff that you're doing something wrong. It just means those of us that don't want to do AMP don't feel like there's an AMP rifle being pointed at our head that we have to do something that we don't feel is right for our technology stack or our solution. Hope that answers the question.
I can maybe also add on some of those. So I think it's also worth noting that AMP is something that's primarily driven, kind of Google's kind of one of the primary drivers behind AMP. So also keep in mind that Mike needs to have a certain level of diplomacy here. I think I I can be more outspoken and say I absolutely hate AMP. I'm not a fan. Yeah, but also take that for what it's worth.
I'm going to be super honest. I don't like AMP either. I'm just always nervous because there are folks that have committed to doing stuff in AMP, and it's not a case of their work is invalid, right? You're still going to have a good, fast, lightweight experience. So the people that are like my concern about denigrating any technology is more the people that are successfully using the technology than the people who created the technology in the first place.
No, 100%. You know, like, and I think also there needs to be a distinction between like AMP, like do I like AMP on a per product, like the scope of a product, and do I like AMP within the broader like web landscape and kind of the underlying philosophies behind the web. So that's also worth kind of noting. Like I think also like I can maybe also respond a bit to the question about server-side rendering. And like I obviously don't want to put any words in your mouth, or but like I think from my side, what I often see is that a lot of people tend to come like very like full circle when it comes to server-side rendering. So, you know, so we kind of started out with kind of moving some logic to the front end so that we don't have these kind of like heavy server, like this constant chatter between the server and the actual client side. But you know, then like people started doing like server-side rendering, and like what I see is a lot of people kind of maybe embrace that a bit too much, and now they just end up again at a place where we were trying to solve with server-side, with like actually moving some of this to the client. So like to me, it's more about like progressively loading content than it is about server-side rendering being bad per se or so forth. It's just like I see server-side rendering a lot of times where people just essentially just defer everything mostly to the server once again. So that kind of means there's a large time where you're looking at a white screen and nothing happens every time you kind of do an interaction or something. And I think like why this maybe doesn't apply that much to, sure, you said the magic word, you said Jamstack, like, and I was like immediately like, I'm a massive fan. But I think what the like kind of a Jamstack approach forces you to not do that, because there are limits to what you can pre-render. So by definition, it forces you to think about progressive rendering. So, you know, like what's the first stuff you're going to deliver? And then, you know, maybe then like the authentication part comes after that. And, you know, and maybe after that, like there's some enhancements and things. So it kind of forces you. So I think like that's maybe also why I would consider Jamstack a bit more buffered against kind of like some of the problems that I see. Yeah.
Yeah,
so absolutely. Your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, I agree. I like static rendering. Jamstack is a bit buzzwordy, but like I really like pre-rendering or static rendering because it forces you to put those walls in place as to what is content that doesn't need to be dynamic and what is content that does need to be dynamic, right? It has very, very good results. And like if you're producing static content, you can cache that far better. So you can set very, very good caching policies, make better use of CDNs, and make better use of the browser local cache. So, so from that perspective, I really think it's conceptually a really, really good step to go into. And then the next step is the idea of when you then do it at scale. Static rendering at scale is complicated and requires lots of build tooling and, you know, cache invalidation and complexity. And in that example, if you take a static mindset and apply it to server-side rendering, then you start hitting that sweet spot of giving you the best flexibility in terms of delivering fast experiences and the most dynamism.
I think even like Next nowadays, you can do like both like isomorphic and kind of like a type of a jam approach. So there's like 3 types of rendering, which is super intriguing.
Yeah, I think Next is the state of the art at the moment with that sort of single framework approach. But I think it's always important to distrust your tools and double check what they're doing, right? Don't assume that Next is going to be fast just because it's Next.
Cool. I see there's some really great questions popping up in chat.
There's another good question about fresher data. Now, I have been told, I haven't tested it yet, but I have been told, so the problem with the Crux data set, right, or the BigQuery data, is that it's a month delayed, which is near useless to most people, right? I have been told that if you use the RESTful API, not only do you get more granular data, but you can also get fresher data. So allegedly, you can query for very recent data via the REST API to build dashboards or build it into your reporting pipeline or something. I'm going to, and by recently, I mean, I was told that today. So I'm going to go and test that tomorrow. It's on my to-do list.
Well, now we have you officially on record here saying it.
I'm going to do it tomorrow, yeah. It's a problem. Overcommit.
Cool. I have some other ones from questions? My side I can fire. Yeah. So let's talk progressive web apps. How do they fit into the picture here? Because I assume like it's hard to tell the whole story with something like Web Vitals when it comes to progressive web apps. So I think let me maybe first establish something. So it sounded to me like this isn't something that the Google crawler collects. This is something that's collected anonymously from usage, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so obviously then, given like, and this is probably only Chrome, I can safely assume. Yeah,
you can safely assume that it's only Chrome.
Yeah, I'm not assuming that Apple's probably going to share their telemetrics with Google. So like, yeah, so I think like obviously because Google is such a big player within the kind of the PWA space, obviously that is going to have a big influence here. So do you think it might disproportionately like favor PWAs, which I'm completely not opposed to, but do you think like there's a risk of that happening? Whereas like people to access it in like on Safari or whatever, like it might actually not be that same experience.
So it's a complicated, multifaceted question, right? So let's start with the one part. Let's start about PWA. I really hate the phrase PWA because it's too broad, right? There's too much stuff that it tries to smash under one umbrella. But I think if you focus on like the experience part of PWAs and the things that Service Worker enables, performance is really, really crucial there. And a lot of what they're trying to get is using the Service Worker for better performance and trying to deliver like native-like experiences. So things loading fast and things being readily available is a crucial part of the PWA umbrella. Now, having said that, there are two things that pull in tension against it. So with the Service Worker, you want to pre-cache a lot of stuff so that things can be available offline. The more code you have, the more stuff you have to pre-cache, the slower the page is going to load. So that pulls in tension against one another. And I think the common argument is to runtime cache. So as you get things, so lazy load and then caches as it becomes necessary. And then the final point is that like PWAs lend themselves, it's not a strict rule. There's a place for Service Workers and runtime caching in server-side rendered applications, but PWAs lend themselves to single-page applications, things that are going to be whole, holistic, standalone apps. And we know that the Web Vitals currently overly penalize things that are single-page apps because they're long-lived, right? So the layout happens over a long period of time.
Yeah, so I think that would maybe also be a follow-up question from me, is that like how is there even a way to factor in context? Because you can't really compare something like Wikipedia to Trello, you know, in terms of like all of these metrics. Like that's not kind of a fair judgment, because they do very different things, you know.
Yeah.
Mm.
So so it is complicated, and it just depends on how things are going to surface. Because you must remember that in this particular context, Trello very much cares about first input delay, right? They definitely do. Maybe a little bit less about layout shift. Maybe layout shift isn't a big deal for them because they know they're going to shift their layout because people are going to move stuff around, and they want lots of UX-y things around that. Largest contentful paint is a low-hanging fruit for them, right? You want that to be easily available. So there's 2 of the 3 metrics that mean a lot. Now, there are 2 metrics that they really do want to target and optimize for. But in terms of Google search, Trello surfacing cards in Google search is maybe not the biggest deal in the world. Although maybe it is. Maybe there are some indexed public boards that they want to surface in search, and then these things become really, really important, and they have to re-architect to be able to do that. And like that becomes that point where you make these architectural decisions, and you reach a point where you cross that almost functional boundary of like, oh, now we want our stuff to be indexed. And as soon as you do that, then the rules of the game change fundamentally.
So I see Mr. Kiffy actually raised a very interesting point, and he said by definition, you know, PWAs are not present at like first load,
Although the service worker, so the service worker doesn't come down with the HTML, but the browser does very fancy things to pick up the service worker, spin off the JavaScript thread for the service worker as soon as possible, and then start pre-caching assets that the rendering is going to need before it gets to them, right? So the service worker is very closely related to first load, and if you're smart about the stuff that you're pre-caching in your service worker and super judicious, you can see an improvement in some things in first load, but like it's like a block of chocolate being great, but a whole bag of Easter eggs being terrible, and you're feeling awful afterwards. If you do too much on that service worker as a part of the first load and pre-caching, it's going to slow down your net page.
So I think his question was specifically like how much is first load weighed? I actually don't know the answer to that. Like, does it only look at the first load of the page, or does it look at subsequent like usage of the page like later on?
So this is real user data, right? So if that user is visiting your page 1,000 times and you've cached stuff really, really well using service worker, and the first load is really long and has poor data, the other 999 times that they hit the page and they have amazing first input delay and amazing LCP and all of the other key metrics, then that gets reported back to Chrome for your origin, not necessarily just the first load. The challenge of it, however, so let's say first visit, right? Yeah. So the challenge, however, is that your layout shift on a longer lived application is going to hurt you.
Cool.
But there is still value.
But it's not like first load is disproportionately weighed against kind of like, okay, cool. So I think that's maybe what he was kind of like basing his question on. All
okay.
Right. Yeah.
Sorry, I misunderstood.
So then another question I have from my side, yeah, I'm just going to keep these firing away until anyone else asks a question. Like, you guys are bringing this upon yourselves. Like, so someone please ask a question and stop me. So, you know, like, I think also once again back to progressive web apps. So my understanding is on Android, it doesn't use Chrome, it uses the kind of the Android web view. Is that correct? Like when you actually install it to your Android device?
No, it doesn't use the Android web view. It uses it's a proper Chrome browser.
Okay. And
yeah.
Okay. So that's interesting. So would the implication then be if you have multiple browsers? I actually don't even know the answer to this. If you have multiple browsers, would you be able to install different variations of the browser from of a PWA based on the browser? I don't think you can actually do that.
I haven't validated that, but that would be a very, very interesting thing to test. I'm not going to try it now, but it could be a very interesting thing to test to see how that works.
So maybe on this as well. So, things that don't necessarily are not kind of Chrome TM, but kind of use underlying Chrome technologies, like let's say like Electron or whatever. Are those things factored in at all, or is it just like purely like Chrome?
It's purely Chrome because Electron is Chromium, right?
Oh, that's true. Open source.
Yeah. So it doesn't have the phone home stuff of Chrome to report anonymous usage.
Okay, I guess that's true. I see there's another question. Sure, Vicky has some great questions. Is there any way that one can collect RUM data yourself? We made an attempt utilizing GTM and GA, which I assume refers to Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics, but it was a bit iffy. And is it worth the attempt?
Am I sharing the right screen? Can you see?
You're sharing a screen.
Am I typing on that screen? Is it
Yeah,
a blank Chrome window?
No, you are typing Web Vitals.
Yes. So here's webvitals.js. I'm assuming you use some kind of analytics, right, to be asking this question. So webvitals.js is a less than 1 kilobyte library that you can include. It's literally the same code as this Web Vitals extension over here. Okay. It's really, really, really good. It's really small. And there's a part here where you can log out the data yourself for the key Web Vitals, and they've literally got copy paste the code to send that stuff to an analytics endpoint using send beacon. If you're going to do this, I recommend doing it on the page hide or visibility changed events on the DOM, because before unload and unload, don't reliably send on mobile, and mobile is the thing that you want to measure this for. Because if somebody minimizes the browser, it backgrounds the page, and then they close the app, it's never going to report that. So visibility change, window.add event listener, visibility change, send phone home with analytics data, and then you can keep whatever data yourself you want. And in fact, that's encouraged to look at your own data rather than rely just on Crux. It's definitely worth the attempt. Yeah.
Is there some type of like CLI tool?
CLI tool for?
Like if you want to include like Web Vitals in your CI?
I mean, it is just like.
So I'm talking more about the reporting than the actual gathering of information.
Yeah. So the gathering is really, really simple. The reporting and like I think this is an important point, right? Because you're looking at real user data. So you want this stuff to live next to your analytics data.
That's true.
So that wherever you're making decisions based off of conversion or the value of features or the value of experiences, that's where you want your performance data.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Whereas something like Lighthouse, you can plug into your CI.
Yeah. Okay. That's the appropriate tool for that pump, right? For the iterating on things.
Okay.
There was a question on client-side routing on service or single-page applications. I think I stand to be corrected, but I think that if you use a single-page application that respects the page history stuff, so pushes and pops from the page history stack, and I think in those cases it will fire the unload events appropriately. And those unload events are what Google uses to write home. So I think that if you use client-side routing that integrates with the history API, it should be okay, but I haven't validated that myself. So I might be completely wrong here.
Yeah, so that's pretty much like most of your big things like Vue router, React router, those type of things. Yeah. I'm wondering whether hash routing makes any difference.
It definitely does. Hash routing will not do it. It won't find home because it's a hack, to be quite honest.
No, as is most things on the web, but yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. When are we? Let me maybe start with this. What is the underlying logic here from Google as a kind of organization? Is it purely just to incentivize people to focus on these things, or is there like some functional value to them apart from like just knowing like these type of things?
Yes, there is definite functional value. So Google's a carrot and stick company, right? Remember, we were just talking about AMP and the carousel to get people to build fast experiences. They've been really, really clear that they make their money off of the web as an ecosystem, right? So the web has to exist. That's why they're pushing PWA. That's why they're pushing capabilities like Project Fugu. That's why they care, right? Because if the web dies and people move to native platforms and proprietary closed down ecosystems rather than the web, they lose lots of money. They lose the bulk of the stuff that their livelihood is based on. And then when you speak to the individual people, they actually really care about growing the adoption of the web. And growing the adoption of the web means not focusing on people that have expensive MacBook Pros on fiber lines, but people that are new to the internet. They've gotten a feature phone for the first time and they're like, cool, well, how do I get information? And for those people to grow the web and grow the capability, they demand more. They need more than we're currently providing them. And if you look at the data in aggregate, like at a macro level, and from that perspective, punting another project I was involved in a few years ago, which is the HTTP archive Almanac. If you haven't, go take a look at it. It's experts analyzing macro trends in terms of real user data. Using the HTTP archives dataset, which is not the same, but very similar in vein to the Crux dataset that we're talking about. And if you look at that, like JavaScript bundles just go bigger, performance just goes down, and we're getting worse, not getting better. And if we want this thing to grow and flourish rather than wither and die, it needs to be better and faster, both having newer capabilities and being a better experience. And a better experience, like layout shift, is not a performance thing, right? Layout shift is a very direct user-facing experiential metric, right? We're trying to measure how your users feel about the cynical patterns to clickjack and to move ads around the page for maximum viewability, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay, that's a great answer. And like, like it makes a lot of sense, because I think for a while now, like the biggest existential threat to the web is performance. And like we are not where we should be, and we're not on the way to where we should be going.
I've got like more of like a kind of high level question here, and kind of might sound stupid at the beginning, but right. So like, obviously, performing sites, like high performance sites, are awesome. And the question with regards to like Google getting involved and like coming up with like other, like the concept of core web vitals and whatnot, like this is like obviously to reward high performing sites by ranking them higher in search results, right? So if you score high on your web core vitals, then Google's going to rank you higher. And that's ultimately the high level view, right? Am I correct?
In this particular instance, yes. So to be super clear, they've been pushing Lighthouse for a long time. They've been developing it for a long time. They've been trying to get people to care about performance for a while. And it's only with the threat of, oh, okay, fine, we'll surface it in search, that people are now taking it seriously, or the big organizations take it seriously.
Totally. Okay, cool.
So unfortunately, like there's what people are like, man. You need to offer both the carrot and the stick, and like you can try and convince people that eating your vegetables is for the best good of mankind, but doesn't mean people are going to.
Do you think that Google cares more about the Crux data or about the lab data, like the Lighthouse data?
I think, and like I can only comment on the stuff that I've heard. And I think that they've been really clear that they like the lab data because it gives easy, actionable audit advice. So at like the ground floor, when you're starting a journey, is very, very useful. But they've been very clear that if you're not measuring real users and making decisions based off your real users, you're not at a level of maturity that you need to be. So if to be perfectly honest, like real users and field data is the highest priority for them. And then lab data is sort of a compromise to drive folks towards real data.
For sure, but I mean, as far as like them rewarding like higher ranking, they're ultimately going to base that on the data that they've collected, not on any sort of lab data. The crux data is ultimately what they're going to.
That is absolutely,
like
that is my understanding. For search ranking, I think, and let me see if I can, I'm going to see if I can find another link and I'll post it. But I think they've been really, really clear that, yeah, here's the link. Visited it recently. I reference it quite a lot. Like they've been very clear about what the page experience is going to be based off of and what they care about. They're going to use Crux data or real user data. So whether it's the Crux data set or it's a larger data set based off of the stuff that Crux is based off of,
sure.
that they'll never tell us, right? But it's the same stuff at the end of the day that they're planning on using.
For sure, for sure.
That link has a very clear FAQ about the bits and pieces that folks should care about. And it's also got, so maybe some answers will be there. And it's also got other links to the page experience. So they've been including page experience data for a long time, a long time. They've considered performance stuff, but I think that's been Google bot-based performance stuff, I think. I stand to be corrected. But this whole change is to use the Web Vitals because they like how they're shaping up.
Yeah, I personally don't mind it. Like, to be honest, like I would even would like them to maybe lean into that even more. Just because, like, as I mentioned, you know, like we clearly whatever we're doing at the moment isn't working. Which leads me to my next question. Like, is there any reason why accessibility hasn't kind of been factored to any type of metric around that? Like, from a technical perspective, like it seems that it shouldn't be that hard, and also like talking about things getting worse, like accessibility is right up there. I don't want to say it's an existential threat because, but like the alternatives are usually even worse, like proprietary things. Yeah, like is there a specific reason? I've always wondered why accessibility hasn't ever been considered as a ranking factor.
So I have no idea what the thinking is behind why accessibility hasn't been included yet. All I can say is that they do care about accessibility. They've done a lot of accessibility work and include a lot of stuff in Lighthouse and continue to. And I can only imagine that if the Web Vitals end up being a success, they want to grow this, and it'll only be a matter of time before they start reporting in context of accessibility, I think.
So what you're saying is that with regards to like ranking, that they only care about the performance metrics, and they're not actually boosting you on accessibility best practices and SEO.
So the page experience metrics, and if you follow the, I'm going to share and follow the link. I'm thinking of a particular diagram. Okay, if we go to the page experience stuff that they're planning on doing for search ranking, this is not the one I want. I don't know. I obviously clicked on the wrong one. No. Damn it. Come on, man. Where's that diagram?
So while you're finding that, like from my side, I have yet to come across anything that indicates that is some like a deciding factor in anything. I've yet to see anything, but obviously Mike will probably be able to give a more like insightful answer to that.
Yeah, okay, sorry, the diagram's gone, but there is a, so this is what the page experience signals are. So firstly, they're using Core Web Vitals, then they're doing a mobile friendliness test, then they're doing a safe browsing test, and then they're looking at HTTPS, and then intrusive interstitials test. And looking at all of this data together in conjunction is the page experience signal that feeds into part of the search algorithm, part of. So the Lighthouse stuff, so the thing is that all of those guidances and that audit feedback is to funnel you into being able to pass these tests, the SEO bits, the best practices in terms of mobile friendliness and safe browsing, etc. They are all roughly aligned. I wouldn't say that there's an exact analogy. And like, I definitely, I want to be clear, I don't pretend to speak on behalf of Google or the search team. I don't know exactly what their thinking is, but I can only talk about the stuff that they have publicly said that they care about, and they care about measuring now.
Sure. So, I mean, I think that like, you know, if like here it says like, you know, mobile friendly, that's definitely going to use like accessibility data and like, you know, like cumulative layout shift data. So I'm sure that, you know, that the answer to the question that Skulk was saying was like, yeah, they do care about accessibility.
No, definitely they do.
Maybe not as much. Yeah, no, maybe not as much as I do. No, but like obviously they do care. But like to me, it's one of those things. Like I think like a lot of people might find like this kind of stick approach a bit problematic. But I've definitely anecdotally seen a difference in terms of discussions around performance once they started doing this. I've definitely seen a lot of more discussion around HTTPS once they started like kind of like ranking like better by HTTPS and those type of things. So like it is one of those things, like it is, and accessibility is one of those things that, you know, like at the moment there isn't necessarily, so like, I should be careful what I say here, but you know, there's a lot of people that say that accessibility, they make a lot of arguments for like it makes business sense and so forth. But for me, essentially, it kind of runs against this whole like principle of like the 80-20 rule, you know, like in terms of actual real return on your product and so forth. Like you're probably going to get more bang for your buck by spending resources on non-accessibility things. So to me, the only way forward is to almost like be forced by external factors to care about it.
I mean, I guess it's like performance first, and then you know, accessibility and other stuff later. Is there any like has Google like revealed any sort of like threshold metrics on like, let's say, you know, like, so let's say, you know, if you score like between 60 and 80 with regards to like whatever the metrics are, whether we're talking about performance, let's say the metrics that they care about, if you score between 60 and 80, then we will like up rank you by X amount or whatever, if, between like 80 and 90. And then like if you hit 100, you know, then you become like ¡1 super king kind of thing, you know? Is there any
you're talking about Lighthouse score, right?
Well, ultimately, I'm like I don't have access to their data. So if we just like hypothetically say that the Lighthouse score is a representation of their data, if we took that hypothetically, you know, then is there some sort of like, you know, like Google says, okay, cool, if you're scoring like between this percentage and this percentage, then this is like the boost in ranking. If you, because like I heard, like someone said to me the other day, and I was like, oh, that sounds like bullshit. But like, if you like score 100, then, you know, like it's like you become like super god in the ranking kind of thing, you know?
If I may, that's okay. I'm tired of typing, so I think I'll use my voice. Surely Core Web Vitals is not the only ranking factor. I mean, absolutely, it plays a huge role because you want to give a person a good experience. But there's also the user intent. I mean, if you're going to click on a link that says, I want to buy puppies, and you end up on an umbrella site, then that's not relevant. So there's a lot of things that you need to take into account to actually rank better. So this, I think that's just, they may be adding more weight to it if your site is performing better. But there's also content. There is, I mean, all these strategies that people have, link building, etc., and so forth. And it would be nice to see how they weight it, but they'll probably never tell us.
So I have been told by somebody who I trust, which is the DevRel person on the search stuff, Martin Split. I have been told very, very directly that #1 SEO criteria for ranking is content. If your content is trash, you will not rank. If your content is the best, you will rank. End of story. The performance stuff is to disambiguate the people that have really good content from one another. This site has great content, but it also has a great experience and is fast, versus this site has great content, but users typically have a lot of layout because of their advertising. And I think that it's not necessarily a linear ranking that you need to worry about. It's other signals as well, that they've been clear that they want to explore the UX of informing people before they click on a link, how that link is going to perform and the kind of experience that they can expect at the other end. So you might be #1 ranked, but you might not have a positive signal next to that ranking.
Yeah, makes sense. The question I have, and this is more out of curiosity and maybe not within the scope of this specific meet, but I have noticed like our content teams are building content that is not relevant to the product, but they are building it with the intent to link to it from other sites that are more popular. I mean, is that a good strategy?
So I'm not an SEO person.
Okay, fair enough.
In terms of like the sort of black magic incantation that SEO people tell you to do, and this is how much linking, and this is how much content, and these are the meta tags. I think I'm relatively reductionist in terms of you want to prioritize the good content as clearly visible and obvious on the page so that Googlebot will prioritize it. You want to go mobile first because Googlebot is very clearly mobile first. That's what Google cares about ranking. You want to be fast. And I think those are far more important than some flippin' linking scheme or self-referential links or links to big external sites. And those absolutely have some kind of value and they can trick Googlebot for a while. But the thing is that there are other signals that are coming and like they may trick Googlebot, but they're not going to trick users.
Okay, thank you.
So whether you, I mean, whether it's the right thing to build or not, it depends on what your reasons for building it are, I suppose. But
that makes sense.
Yeah, like I see that type of thing also quite a lot, but I definitely don't see it as the site is gonna rank better for the topic that it's kind of aimed at. So one of the ones that I know push this quite hard, and that's because I do a lot of technical writing, is LogRocket. So they produce a lot of content about like just general development things, not necessarily even related to their service. I don't think they're going to rank better if you search for error monitoring or whatever based on that. But my guess is it's more of a branding thing. It's more of a just like someone searches for that and they find it, and then they kind of see what is this LogRocket thing. Yeah. But I always tell people, like, you know, like if you try and game Google, like you're gonna come second. Like you cannot go up against just the resources that they have and the investment and just the incentive that they have to do this properly. Like I don't care how much money you have, like how many hours you have in a day, like you cannot compete with just the resources that they have to make sure that you cannot game their system. yeah, and like I think like there has also been a lot said about Google actually penalizing you when it sees you actually trying to game the system. I don't know, as with most things, you know, it's a lot of hearsay, but yeah, like I tend to like see SEO as like just do what's good for the users, and like I guess Google trust Google to determine that. Yeah, but
Yes, I was
mm,
sorry. I was just about to say that is maybe focus less on building things for the bot and
mm,
focus on user experience, and then
mm,
utilizing the core web vitals to give them the best experience possible, and then
mm,
content that is relevant to what they're searching for.
no,
I think
no, no,
that's a
no,
great
sure.
summary. I think that's exactly what we should be doing. And I
Mm,
think that I believe that that's what Google's trying to incentivize, is for
mm,
us to prioritize user experience. And these metrics, as much as it may be reductionist, are there to try and give very clear thresholds to what good looks like. And I think that so people focus on that very clearly, and they focus on the number and the ideas and what you know, how one gets a better result. But I think the fact that they've clearly articulated what good looks like, what good enough looks like, is very valuable to a lot of people. So you know what you're aiming for, and you know how far away from good you are. But I think that was an incredibly well articulated summary, Vicky. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, like I think also for me as well, as you know, like yeah, like obviously content is always going to influence SEO more, you know, because otherwise, like if I just pull up a page that says download my app, you know, here's a link, go to the Play or the Apple Store, like that's going to outperform any other. Like if I have like kind of a Kanban app, and like I just have a splash screen that says go to the App Store, like that's gonna outperform like anything Trello or whoever can do. So obviously content is always going to be prioritized, but I think like the thing here is that, you know, the people who are really in that game, I think like even marginal gains, you know, it's kind of like almost a thing of like, you know, there's this often referenced example of like Amazon at one point making their page like a couple of milliseconds slower, and like just due to economies of scale, like their turnover just like plummeted. And I think it's the same here, you know, because of like the guys who are really there on the top 5 hits, like just due to economy of scale, if you can move from 5 to 4, like that's going to have such a massive influence on your business, you know. I think the rest of us, you know, and I think it's also it's one of those things where we have very clear guidelines. When it comes to content, it is a bit like a lot of hearsay. It is a bit of like, we're not really sure what to do, but here we have guidelines. So, you know, even if the returns aren't that great, just the fact that we have measurable steps we can do, like even if it's like smaller returns, that's still extra guaranteed returns compared to like playing around with content, trying strange things and so forth. Yeah. Cool. Oh, sure. I see there's a comment.
So I'm unfortunately out of time.
Cool.
So I've got to drop off. But thank you very much for having me, and it was a wonderful conversation. If anybody has any questions, I'd happily try and answer and help or point folks in the right directions. Yeah, thank you, and I'll see you all around.
Just quickly in closing, where can people find you? And if people want to give you money in some way, is there a way they can do that?
No, I will not accept your money. But if you want to find me, you can find me on Twitter. I am unimaginative, and my user handle is Mike Geyser. So if you are a Twitter person, you can reach me there. Otherwise, you can always come and watch Josie JS, where we talk about a whole bunch of JavaScript and web-related stuff and I think you might also find it interesting. So
Cool.
yeah, thank you very much, folks.
Cool. Thanks so much, Mike. Have a great evening. Everyone else as well. Have a good evening.